For years, the cool breezes and optimism of San Francisco has been felt in its streets and shopping malls. Westfield San Francisco Centre, once the highest performing mall in the world, defined the shopping mall experience and was a place where tourists, business travelers, and locals alike could congregate and take part in said experience. However, with the rise of the post-COVID-19 pandemic economy, the fall of San Francisco has come. Record rent prices, crime, and homelessness, coupled with development restrictions and the crash of tourism, has changed the most desirable city in the US into the most desolate. One by one, retailers have closed up shop, leaving abandoned storefronts, and commercial real estate corporations have had no choice but to default on their now worthless properties. The owners of Westfield Centre announced in June that they also would be walking away, and with its flagship store set to close, the future of the mall looks incredibly bleak. Join me as we take a look at the history of this retail mecca, discover all the factors that led us to this point, and what options the mall has left. My name is LaBreece, and this is Modern Ruins, Episode 18. A building, no matter how big or how small, always has a person who spent all of their energy trying to make it happen, and that person always has a story of their own. In 1954, after having a go on Wall Street, a man named Sheldon Gordon decided to leave his job at Bear Stearns for San Francisco, joining the firm Milton Myers & Company. The company would quickly be acquired by one of their own executives and renamed the Shoreline Company, who would become the largest privately held owner, operator, and developer of Class A office space in the US, and had a dramatic impact on the skyline of their home city. Gordon was a manager at the company until starting his own partnership in 1965 with Philip Lyon, known as the Philip Lyon Gordon & Company. It was there he got to be a part of some very interesting and innovative projects in the sprawling retail space, such as the Kahala Mall in Honolulu, Hawaii's first enclosed mall, the Pearl Ridge Mall in Aiea, Hawaii, featuring the first monorail system in a shopping center, and Valco Park in Cupertino, California, which was the first use of a merchandise bridge over an 8-lane highway. The final project the pair worked on together was Beverly Center in Los Angeles, which replaced Beverly Park, a small amusement park near Beverly Hills. It was after this point that Philip Lyon retired, leaving Gordon as the sole leader of a fast-growing and highly reputable mall developer. He renamed it the Gordon Company in 1983 and began unleashing his now untethered creativity in several new projects across the real estate scene. In his first solo investment with the company, he co-developed the $55 million My Maison Sofitel with French company Accor, which stood across the street from Gordon's Beverly Center. The ribbon cutting was attended by Hollywood icons such as Jack Lemmon, Ed McMahon, and Susan Plachette, and many others who joined in the lavish festivities. He then turned his attention back to the booming indoor mall concept with two new innovative developments in the works. One became known as the Forum Shops at Caesars in Las Vegas, but first, he returned to his company's headquarters, where most of his work throughout his early career was on display: San Francisco. What Gordon ended up with was an idea for a small, 500,000 square foot indoor shopping mall that would feature a 350,000 square foot anchor space on top. The project would be located on San Francisco's developing retail mecca, Market Street, between 4th and 5th Streets, replacing an old-fashioned JCPenney and right next to the still existing yet faded Emporium department store that had survived the 1906 earthquake before having to be rebuilt 2 years later due to a fire. At the time, Big E, as the Emporium was known, was a department store for the working class, while the more fashionable shopped in Union Square. The local columnist at the time was pessimistic about Gordon's plan, saying its success would require wealthy shoppers to shop in a war zone, with progressives equally concerned about the potential gentrification that was sure to follow. Despite detractors, Fifth and Market had a lot going for it at the time. The formation of BART and Muni Metro in the 1970s allowed for much bigger crowds to congregate there than in the upscale Union Square. It was also more freeway accessible and had more hotels within a 3-block radius than in most major cities. While Sheldon Gordon was focused on the entire development, its biggest attraction was what caught the attention of the public and local media, and Gordon was sure to add his innovative retail touch to showcase it. Given the gamble of adding such an upscale store to a lower-end area, Jim Nordstrom was incredibly nervous about the mall's grand opening, specifically the opening of his first store in the Bay Area. However, his reservations were quickly dismissed when on October 7th, 1988 at 9:30 a.m., thousands who had lined up to partake in the grand opening of San Francisco Shopping Centre rushed through its doors up 4 floors to the first ever in North America spiral escalators, which brought them to the 5-story Nordstrom store, where they were greeted by a champagne bar, spa, fireplace, and a live piano soundtrack to boot. In 2.5 hours, 60,000 shoppers had entered San Francisco Centre, with people waiting in line to ride its triage of escalators like guests at an amusement park. Columnist Rob Morris recalling the event as a wild scene of mass consumer lust. Nordstrom's had its most successful store opening in the company's history, doing $2 million in sales, and Market Street, and in turn broader San Francisco, was changed forever, as the San Francisco Museum of Art, the Metreon, Salesforce Tower, Eastcut, and China Basin projects would follow in the coming decades, with many attributing their arrivals to the early success of Nordstrom's and San Francisco Shopping Center. The rest of the mall didn't quite have the same opening experience as its anchor store, but in just a few short years, the small center became one of the top performing malls in the country, outshining mega malls with quadruple the square footage, anchors, and retail stores. Sheldon Gordon was no doubt excited about the success of the mall, but by the time it opened, he had already had his eyes on a much more lucrative project in the Forum Shops at Caesars in Las Vegas, a Roman-themed, similarly sized shopping mall that would be part of Caesars Palace Resort. His attention had shifted to this endeavor as he had co-announced the project with Caesars 2 years before San Francisco Shopping Center even opened. 5 years after the Forum Shops was completed in Las Vegas, Gordon sold a half stake of the San Francisco property and the management contract to Urban Shopping Centers Incorporated, a Chicago-based realty trust. And that was just the beginning. Bear with me here, as always, real estate mergers and acquisitions quickly get very confusing. In October of 2000, USC Inc. was acquired by Rodamco North America NV, which ironically was a European-based company that invested in the US real estate market. In January 2002, Rodamco sold their stake to Australia-based Westfield Group, where Westfield quickly bought out Gordon, taking complete ownership over the property and the management contract. And the mall was renamed Westfield San Francisco Centre, more commonly referred to as Westfield Centre. To make things even more confusing, the adjoined but separately owned and operated Emporium, after 100 years of operation, was closed by its owner, Federated Department Stores, who was in the process of buying out its parent company. In 2003, another company called Forest City acquired redevelopment rights to the 100-year-old structure, and Forest City and Westfield Group shortly announced that they would be restoring the Emporium and remodeling the existing mall structure. Given the age of the Emporium, there were 2 significant problems in restoring it, the biggest one being that the building was quite dangerous as it had never been updated to modern seismic building codes. The second problem somewhat contradicted the first, that being that San Francisco's redevelopment agency had protected the structure for historic preservation. Forest City and Westfield Group got permission to redevelop the Emporium via promising to maintain significant aspects of its architecture, namely its domed glass roof and facade. Construction began by building a temporary support structure under the 102-foot wide and 500,000-pound glass dome to hold it up 3 stories above the ground while the rest of the interior and original supports were demolished. For reasons that cannot be confirmed, about 60 feet of the protected facade on Market Street was demolished, likely due to concerns over safety given the building's age. This resulted in a $2.5 million fine from the redevelopment agency and several lawsuits. However, the partnership stated that not only had they met their legal obligations, but that another city agency, the planning department, issued permits for the demolition, and so they saw no justification for them being issued a fine when another city agency said it was okay for them to demolish the structure. When it was all said and done, $440 million had been spent rebuilding the Emporium and revamping the mall. Now, it was 3 times its original size at over 1.5 million square feet of retail space, over 180 individual stores, triple the number previously, and had another anchor tenant in Bloomingdale's who made their 340,000 square foot space their West Coast flagship store, second in size to only their location in New York City. Also added was a 9-screen Century Theaters multiplex featuring 2 XD screens, a 30,000 square foot Bristol Farms upscale grocery store, and 170,000 square feet of office space that would be used by San Francisco State University for their downtown campus. On September 29, 2006, the new Westfield San Francisco Centre opened with as much fanfare as its original opening 18 years prior. The ribbon-cutting ceremony featured 4 city and Westfield executives, Donald Fisher, the founder of The Gap, among California First Lady Maria Shriver and San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom. The festivities began with the singing of At Last by Kim Nally, and cheerleaders waved and cheered outside the new Bloomingdale's store, chanting "Shop at Bloomie's." Inside, dancers rappelled from the fully restored glass dome down 100 feet to the floor with streams of red cloth, an acrobatic spectacle that brought the pageantry to what many believed was a historic event. Shriver said that she would never want to miss a mall opening again if all were as much of an event. Mayor Newsom stated that the completion of the mall would add over 3,000 jobs, and recalled what he remembered about seeing the dome in the Emporium when visiting there as a child. Opening 2 hours early to prevent long lines, by noon, over 16,000 people had rushed through the center's doors. Lines still formed outside retailers like H&M, who were offering up to $300 gift cards to the first 100 customers to celebrate the event, with Bloomingdale's sales averaging $100,000 an hour on opening day. Within 3 short years, the mall was a finalist for World's Best Shopping Center by the International Council of Shopping Centers, winning Best of the Best for design and development. After opening, Forest City took an equity stake and Westfield Group took over management of the entire complex. While the Westfield Group does deserve some praise for constructing an outstanding facility, there were a lot of factors that played into their favor, namely San Francisco's rise from a traditional city into the tech renaissance, most commonly known as the rise of Silicon Valley. Given the area's weather, proximity to Stanford University and both their talent pool and research labs, increasing supply of venture capitalists, and historically steady flow of spending by the U.S. Department of Defense and Navy research, San Francisco, and by extension the larger Bay Area, became a hotbed for tech startups that fueled the dot-com boom of the late 1990s and further attracted the likes of what would become the most valuable companies in the world, like Facebook, Apple, Twitter, and Google. As you can imagine, in a very short amount of time, San Francisco's economy exploded. Gentrification took over the city. Demand for upscale housing and office space ignited a new round of high-rise development, some attributing the success of the San Francisco Centre as to the main driver of high-rise development south of Market Street. Population growth led the city to reach a record number of residents, and considering both the economic and population explosion and lack of industry's ability to meet the demand, prices for housing and commercial spaces rose to levels that very few places in the world had seen before. Even with favorable luck, it's not been a totally smooth rise. The city lost about 100,000 residents and rental prices fell 70% after the dot-com bubble burst, but the arrival of social media companies quickly restored its exponential trajectory. In 2004, only 35% of San Francisco residents had been born in California, and 40% were born outside the US. Rent prices also crashed by 30% during the Great Recession, but that issue wasn't unique to the Bay Area, and by that point, big tech was shouldering the economic load. When thinking about San Francisco and economic downturns, the idiom holds true. The higher they rise, the harder they fall. This issue, coupled with a niche decline in shopping malls, made one wonder in the early 2010s, just how low would Westfield Centre go in the next economic downturn? What's most shocking about the mall's success is that malls across the US had begun to decline as early as the mid-1990s, as more localized big box stores like Walmart took hold, followed by the rise of internet shopping in the late 2000s, eliminating the need of shopping malls' hundreds of specialty stores and anchors' manufactured monopolies. Now, Predominantly accelerated by the rise of online shopping, most malls across the US have lost half of their value since 2016 alone. However, I wouldn't group downtown shopping centers like Westfield into the same group as large regional malls with huge parking lots, as the downtown versions are a bit more resilient given their broader, tourist-dependent, and higher-end customer base. While the mall was still thriving, in 2011, San Francisco police debated adding a substation to establish a permanent police presence in the mall, as according to SFPD, they were responding to 911 calls 3 times a day and up to 5 times a day on weekends for shoplifting and other incidents. The idea was supported by many of the stores who had grown concerned over long response times, but it doesn't appear anything came of this. For the rest of the decade, the mall appeared to be doing very well. Lego opened their first store in San Francisco in the mall in 2016, and the Golden State Warriors opened a team store there in 2017, among countless other openings. The mall briefly went trending for its upside-down Christmas tree hung from the historic Emporium glass dome at the end of 2016. In 2018, Brookfield Asset Management acquired Four City Enterprises and consequently took over the company's stake in Westfield Centre. That same year, Westfield released a rendering that illustrated their plans to add 50,000 square feet of office space to the property, but before those plans came to fruition, Westfield Group and all of their assets were acquired by Paris-based Unibail-Rodamco for $15 billion, and the combined company became known as Unibail-Rodamco Westfield, in which it became one of the largest companies in Europe and the de facto largest commercial real estate company on the continent, with a quarter of their revenue coming from U.S. properties in 2019. Ownership of the mall coming near full circle since Rodamco's first ownership stint in the early 2000s. With the newly combined company ready to look to the bright future ahead, the only sight they would be seeing for the foreseeable future was the worst one they could have ever imagined: empty malls. With most of the United States not feeling pandemic effects until March, experts now believe that the coronavirus known as COVID-19 was circulating in the Bay Area as early as December 2019, with the first confirmed case coming on the last day of January 2020. As the virus spread, shut down all public gatherings and required all public places to close, issuing a stay-at-home order except for essential travel to citizens a week later, becoming the first municipal government to do so in the US. While the shelter-in-place order was only meant to last a couple of weeks, local officials kept extending it, with enforcement being some of the strictest in the nation. What once was a vibrant downtown full of tourists and business travelers enjoying coffee shops and strolls on Market Street or the Golden Gate Bridge was now a desolate, liminal landscape whose only certainty was that things were never going to be the same again. The skyscrapers that once were the illustration of opportunity and growth now sat empty as workers began reporting to their kitchen tables. Planes that once brought people to the Bay Area by the thousands were now landing at airports seldomly. The little coffee shops, cafes, corner stores, and music venues saw their business opportunities stripped away from them as they were forced to close, with no choice but to let their employees go, many closing their doors for good. By the summer, officials began implementing their reopening plan, and on June 15, 2020, the mall finally reopened after being shuttered for 3 months, albeit with limited hours to allow for proper cleaning and crowd monitoring. Social distancing and mask mandates were now all too common, with many stores requiring reservations in order to shop there. Despite the near 3-month closure, only 30% of the mall stores reopened. However, this was largely due to businesses needing time to make the necessary changes to reopen, as Nordstrom's wouldn't reopen for a week, while the theater complex wouldn't open again until the fall, the mall reaching the 60% reopen threshold in about 2 months. Despite shoppers getting out their cooped-up demand, key retail stats like footfall and sales would never reach January 2020 levels by the end of the year, January already being a slower shopping season. In URW's annual report, new lease signings declined by 45% year over year, and they were having to forgive rent payments or renegotiate existing leases to maintain tenants, leading to a 20% decrease in rents collected versus projections. After the dust finally settled, the pandemic had permanently changed various aspects of society, meaning the real pain for commercial real estate companies like Unibel Rodamco Westfield was going to be slow and torturous. After the pandemic, the big tech companies, who had been the biggest facilitators of San Francisco's growth, were facing some of the tightest labor markets of all time, with record-breaking low unemployment year after year. This made it near impossible to institute back-to-office mandates, as workers preferred the shift to remote work from home, which was more convenient and allowed them to flee cities with high cost of living, like San Francisco. This seemingly permanent change in the workplace led vacancies in commercial real estate to go from 4% in 2019 to nearly 35% in 2023, increasing eightfold. The decline in workers commuting to downtown only accelerated the closure of small businesses that supported these workers, all contributing to what the media called downtown San Francisco's doom loop. However, looking at URW's annual reports, they repeatedly state that their properties in San Francisco have had such low performance to nearly be considered outliers against their properties in other parts of the globe. While the vacancy rate is marginally higher in San Francisco than in other places, other factors appear to be at play in the city's decline post-pandemic. While still too recent to have conducted proper studies of the issues, crime, drugs, and homelessness have plagued West Coast cities like San Francisco. Despite perception, San Francisco Police Department data shows that nonviolent crime has only increased back to pre-COVID levels, the difference being that San Francisco has lost 7% of its population during that time, and its daytime population consisting of tourists and business travelers has fallen even more so, increasing nonviolent crime per capita, impacting people's perceptions. Violent crime has increased in the Bay Area since the pandemic, but not more so than in other similarly sized cities in the US. Also increasing since the pandemic is the skyrocketing amount of illegal drugs. The number of drug overdoses ballooned to more than twice the annual average in the pandemic, and after declining slightly in 2021 and 2022, overdose deaths are on track to set record highs in 2023. The epidemic being largely driven by the proliferation of the synthetic opioid fentanyl, and the city's mayor has declared a state of emergency to deal with the issue. Homelessness, and more specifically the visibility of homelessness, has been another big issue for San Francisco. Years of gentrification, skyrocketing real estate values, and rental prices have been exacerbated, if not directly caused, by the city's severe restrictions on building new housing units. Experts have stated that deregulating the real estate sector could dramatically decrease the unparalleled housing shortages the city has, going as far as saying that homelessness could be cut in half, the cause of this being that rental prices and property values would plummet as the supply increased. What's made homelessness feel especially bad in San Francisco is the fact that the homeless have comparatively fewer places to hide. Tourists seem to like the dense, European feel of the city. However, this compact development pattern and lack of vacant or undisturbed land means that the only place for homeless encampments to form is on city sidewalks. As the homelessness visibility problem and it becoming more confrontational have gotten worse since the pandemic, the seeming increase in crime and the near collapse of commercial real estate with no sign of recovery soon, San Francisco's most important asset, its image, has been dramatically shaken, resulting in the fall of its largest industry, tourism. The lack of people spending money downtown has dwindled revenue for the businesses that remain, with more shutting down every day. While this is the shallowest decline in rents in the city's three most recent downturns, at only 15%, this one doesn't seem recoverable, and experts have stated that the city's issues have yet to bottom out. For Unibel Rodamco Westfield, the decline in the U.S. commercial real estate market as a whole led to lower performance across the board compared to their European portfolio. This led them to announce in April 2022 that they would be selling off all of their 24 shopping malls in the United States, including Westfield Centre in San Francisco, the company offering no timeline as to when the properties would be offloaded. While alarming, properties change owners and operators all the time, and the bigger concern remained whether Westfield Centre could survive the other issues plaguing San Francisco and malls in general. Unable to pay the now overpriced rent and ravaged by rampant shoplifting, one by one, major retailers began pulling out of San Francisco, first in Union Square, then down Market Street, and in short order, the plague made its way to the mall. In 2023, the San Francisco Standard released an analysis that showed that despite the mall gaining 24 vendors post-pandemic, Westfield Centre had still lost about half of its stores over that same time, which according to their report, the mall was only 60 to 75% occupied even in 2019. In May 2023, Nordstrom, the store that thousands stood in line to witness its opening 3.5 decades earlier, emailed their employees stating that they would not be renewing their lease at Westfield Centre when it ended in August, citing decreased foot traffic in the store. Being one of the mall's 2 anchor stores, and given the exodus of retailers across the city, the blow this gave to the mall's ability to survive could not be overstated. As if the iconic store closure wasn't enough, Cinemark announced 2 days later that they also would be closing their theater operation at the mall, this being more immediately impactful as the company said that they would be having their final movie screenings that week. Unibail-Rodamco Westfield, who had already publicly stated that they were going to sell off all of their malls in the US, seemingly had underestimated how fast San Francisco was faltering, and it now appeared that without their most important anchor in a 2-anchor mall, among other major tenants, it was too late to find a buyer. But honestly, even if Nordstrom had stayed, the company would have never been able to find a buyer for a mall whose value had nearly been cut in half in 5 years. A month after Nordstrom's announced they would not be renewing their lease, URW sent an email to tenants of Westfield Centre stating that they were going to stop making debt payments they owed for the property, meaning that ownership and management would be shifted to creditors who would be forced to foreclose on the now decrepit mall. In their email, they cited decline in sales, occupancy, and foot traffic as their reason for walking away, stating further that before Nordstrom's closes, the mall was still only at 55% occupancy, and footfall, a key retail metric, was still 43% of 2019 levels, all of that translating to a decline in revenue from $455 million pre-pandemic to $298 million in 2022. They pointed out, however, that the nearby Westfield Valley Fair in San Jose experienced a 66% increase in sales over that same period of time, alluding to the unique challenges present in downtown San Francisco. Perhaps the most jaw-dropping stat of all was that URW and their management partner, Brookfield Asset Management, still owed nearly $560 million on the $1.2 billion property, when the fair market value of their debt in Westfield Centre had plummeted to almost half that, to about $300 million according to the company's annual report. Walking away from large commercial properties, informally called strategic defaults, became a common practice in the post-pandemic real estate market. As occupancies plummeted and consequently real estate values, companies have opted to cut their losses and let the bank deal with moving the property. As for what's going to happen next to Westfield Centre, the city's mayor has already called for the mall to be redeveloped, suggesting off the cuff that the mall be demolished and a soccer stadium built in its place. Others have called for it to be redeveloped into an athletic recreation center. I would strongly argue, however, that talks of redevelopment are premature. San Francisco has faced challenges before with far more severe immediate consequences during the dot-com bubble and the global financial crisis. And while there appears to be no quick fix solution in sight for San Francisco's problems, that doesn't mean there isn't one. Post-pandemic, politicians and business leaders touted the economy for its V-shaped recovery, and while most industries quickly got back to business as usual after restrictions were lifted, there are industries, such as commercial real estate, whose recovery is going to look much different. The economy took years to recover and then went on a tear after the Great Recession, and I think once cities take a hard look at themselves and make changes, we will eventually see a recovery and a more sustainable level of growth in urban centers. It may take the rest of the decade or longer, but it will happen. With that being said, assuming Westfield Centre is already or is close to bottoming out on key retail stats, it will be sold at a loss by the creditors who will seize it from URW, and hopefully those buyers will have the capital to see the mall through its recovery. It may never be what it once was. In fact, it may just be redeveloped into office space or some mixed use, but I don't believe demolishing the property is in the cards here. What makes me so optimistic on the mall is 1. What attracted people to San Francisco hasn't changed. The weather, the proximity to Stanford, the large presence of big tech and venture capital, and so people will eventually come crawling back for the same reasons they came to San Francisco in the first place. 2nd, the scarcity of downtown malls. There aren't many other properties like Westfield in urban centers. And lastly, eventually San Francisco's tourism and convention business will recover, and those people I believe were the majority of foot traffic at the mall, and they will be at some point again. While the future remains uncertain, for now, we'll just call this the most dramatic chapter in Westfield Center's story. Predating the peak of San Francisco, its anticipated success and combination of sprawling industry and local history helped shape the city's development. It grew as San Francisco did and became the center of Market Street and the mecca of the shopping mall experience. We may be quick to dismiss the legacy of Westfield Centre, but for many who grew up going to its stores, taking dates to food courts, and buying gifts for loved ones, it will always mean something to people that can't quite be communicated. Whatever the future holds, its legacy will never be erased. And on that note, thank you for watching. Subscribe to LaBreeceTV for more Modern Ruins content. And be sure to comment what modern ruin you'd like us to cover next.